the host just muted me. How appreciative I am that you're here this afternoon, and how appreciative I am of these speakers. So many of you, I personally, and then CAT as a group, have talked to you about this issue, and we had just kind of reached the limits of the expertise we had. So to get to work with this group who have real expertise, it's just stunning. And so I also want to let you know that this group of speakers is doing this for us at no cost, at no charge at all. Their institution values non-traditional learners from groups, underrepresented groups in higher ed. They're an open access institution. They want to support HBCUs. From what I understand, I think I'm right, their president's a Morehouse man. And so it is part of living their mission, the way we are trying to live ours with our students. They're doing this free of charge. So thanks so much to this group. Thanks for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to Jen Simons, who is the Assistant Vice President for Academic Integrity and Accountability at the University of Maryland Global Campus. So her job is to think about these issues. Jen, with that, I'm going to mute myself and turn it to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I and my colleagues are so happy to join you today. Happy to join you just remotely. A year ago, I have my Xavier mug. I joined you in person because I did a program review for the psychology department and got to meet some of your wonderful students. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our institution, a bit about my background, and then my co-presenters are going to share their information as well, so we understand what kinds of backgrounds we're bringing into this. So UMGC, University of Maryland Global Campus, was founded about 70 years ago, and it was started with an effort of some very adventurous faculty members from the main University of Maryland campus at College Park. They traveled the world to educate military service members, and sometimes literally in war zones. And this effort grew and grew and developed into a campus of the University of Maryland system. And so now we offer services and courses in over 140 different locations. We are truly global. And our fall 2020 headcount shows that we are a large institution. It was 58,000 students. And our average age of our students is 32. So our mission is to serve working adults, military service members, adults returning to school, and other students who are in situations where they would like to partake in our online learning. We have military dependents taking our classes as well. And UMGC was early, so very early in distance learning. And distance learning first meant the airplane, but then it meant I heard about voicemail, actually pre-voicemail, answering machine, back to that technology. Answering machine assignments was an innovation about how to have distance learning. And of course, then moved early in the online space when that technology became available. In terms of my background, so before I joined UMGC a year and a half ago, I was a full professor and a department chair at a traditional small liberal arts college. And a couple of things came together with this is that I was part of the first group to offer online classes at our small institution for students who would go home in the summer and take community college classes to get their gen eds done, or would take it online at another institution. So we wanted to do this. I was at Westminster College in Salt Lake City. We wanted to do it the Westminster way. And I've got to say, this challenge to bring engaged, high-touch learning to an online space with that kind of support has been one of the most exhilarating pedagogical challenges and accomplishments of my career. And the UMGC connection came because I taught for the institution when I was on sabbatical. And then I really loved working with the adult learners. And so I joined as a staff member shortly thereafter. And I'll talk a little bit about our office. We are the Office of Academic Integrity and Accountability. The office opened the day that I arrived at UMGC a year and a half ago. We're in academic affairs. We are a distinctly academic function, and we promote integrity through collaboration with the schools, with course development, with faculty development. And of course, we deal with the lack of integrity when it happens, but we all do this with a foundation of a learning-focused philosophy that takes into account our priority on student development. And so this is different than traditional academic integrity in many places, or most places, that is mostly a judicial function. All right, I'll turn it over to Jim Coker.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jim Coker, and I am the chair for the Department of Sciences at the University of Maryland Global Campus. And in non-UMGC speak, that traditionally means that I am seen as an assistant dean. I will be short, but just a little bit about my background. I started off my academic life at Oklahoma State University, getting a couple of undergraduate degrees, then went to graduate school at the Pennsylvania State University and got my PhD in microbial biochemistry. My track, by the way, is very traditionally academic. After my PhD, I went and did a postdoc at the Center of Marine Biotechnology in downtown Baltimore, and then became a faculty member at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where I ran a lab and did all the normal things that people do in a biology department before I ended up at UMUC at that time, now UMGC, thinking that, oh, I'm going to go teach online now at this place. This seems incredibly simple. How hard can online teaching be? Well, I was in for a rather large shock. It was probably the hardest thing as far as teaching goes that I have ever had to do. I've been at UMGC now for about 7.5 years, but it's been really great, although the transition was a little bit bumpy. So I'm here mainly to try to help some other folks out, not have their transition be so bumpy. So I'm going to stop there and turn you over to Robin. And Robin, you're muted.
I am muted, sorry. I am Robin Searles Adenegan. I am the Program Director for Biological Sciences and Laboratory Management at UMGC. To give you a little bit about my background, I am a proud graduate of an HBCU, the Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. And after leaving Lincoln, I went to Penn State College of Medicine and earned a PhD and a master's in pharmacology. And then I did a postdoc at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. After I left the University of Maryland School of Medicine, I taught for many years at Morgan State University, which is another HBCU. And while teaching at Morgan, I was asked to sit on committee to help them develop some online classes. And while I was doing that, I was invited to try to teach to learn about online teaching at Johns Hopkins through their Center of Talented Youth. So these are high achieving 8 to 18-year-olds who are taking college level courses. And they do it all online. So it was a really good introduction to online teaching. And so then after teaching there for a while, about 6 years, I moved on to UMGC, and I've been with UMGC for 14 years now. So hopefully I'll be able to help you guys out with questions.
Excellent. Thank you. So here's what we're planning to talk about. The reality of education right now in our current setting and environment, why students engage in misconduct, the reasons we think about first and reasons we probably might not have thought about, how to create a culture and a community of integrity, considering content and alternatives to traditional assessments. And we will have a Q&A. And as Elizabeth mentioned, please chat your questions, and Jay and or Elizabeth will pop in and share your questions with us at certain points in the presentation. And we will be providing these slides and additional resources after the meeting. I'll be taking notes about other resources that I have not already put together to add to that to send to you all. And some goals of this is to provide you with ideas and maybe solutions for your spring and summer classes while you are doing remote and online learning, and possibly some tools that may allow some flexibility when eventually you all return to face-to-face learning. These tools have been used. Something I arrived at was I ended up really liking hybrid classes after doing fully online and fully face-to-face, and found that hybrid classes really presented some nice flexibility with some face-to-face time and other types of designed learning. So for now, if few of you to chat your biggest questions and concerns that brought you here. So not seeing anything in the chat. Oh, here we go. Students hiring other students, wanting to learn how to address faculty questions, especially STEM. And this is why I've enlisted Jim and Robin to come with me for traditional STEM. Right. All right, so for other things, we think we have heard from multiple institutions about, sorry, I need to switch my slides out. Multiple institutions and a number of us have been doing trainings for other institutions as face-to-face institutions have gone remote. And so we're familiar with a number of different concerns. I'm going to talk a little bit about the setting and the stress of where we are right now. So these are just not normal times. Normal times are never really normal times, but really this is not normal. So we've got education within the context of a global pandemic. It's not just students' academics life. It's not just faculty academic life or the academic life of an institution. We're facing something that's been called allostatic load. So the cumulative wear and tear on us from chronic stress. And really what this means is we don't have all of the psychological, physical, emotional resources that we have when we're not facing the multitude of situations that have resulted from the pandemic. And so a couple of things about this. One is going remote. And it's important to note that there's some different ways about this. So we've got the face-to-face classroom. And as you've noticed, it's not a direct link to go to put the face-to-face all quite directly in the computer. By the way, this used to be a red X, but it's kind of an orange X because I do understand you have synchronous classes going on. So that has some feel of face-to-face more than asynchronous online learning. But online learning is designed to be such. It's designed for the environment, and it is designed with features that start with the online environment and go from there. Some pull from face-to-face pieces, but it's really its own kind of environment. And so what this really means is things are happening all along this continuum. And it's not what people are used to if you're used to face-to-face and not used to teaching in the online environment. So here's my suitcase analogy. So this lovely luggage set from Swiss Gear. I'm getting no kickbacks from Swiss Gear. Normally we have all of our resources because we were moving about the world in the ways we always do, seeing loved ones, traveling, going to conferences, doing all the things we like to do, which gives us a lot of energy and is the way that we're used to going about things. But really, when you think about it, we don't have all those resources. So maybe we're down to that middle suitcase, maybe we're down to the carry-on, and some days it might be this beautiful Xavier backpack that I found on your Xavier store. That some days students and faculty don't have all those resources. So we do want to talk about ways to structure things to take this into account of this more limited but new opportunity environment. One of the biggest myths that we hear is that academic and misconduct and cheating doesn't happen in face-to-face, but it only happens or mostly online. But in fact, research has shown that academic misconduct and cheating, it happens in all environments. It doesn't always get detected in all environments. And there has been a perception that it happens more in online. Some features of online make it easier to detect, but it's important to know that it has been happening. And now maybe you're thinking, well, oh, what was happening in my face-to-face class that you weren't aware of? But just to be aware of that. But there are some reasons why students take unauthorized shortcuts. And some of them relate to the sudden move to online and remote learning. And a couple of these, the ones people think of first are students take these shortcuts because they can, the temptation and the opportunity. If a face-to-face class is trying to be mirrored in an online class, especially exams, there are opportunities, and some students take those new opportunities that they haven't had before. Another one is lots of people are doing it. The perception that other people are engaging in misconduct. Going beyond that, one reason is when they think that people don't care about it, when they think their faculty or their institution doesn't care about it. If nothing happens when somebody engages in misconduct, then they perceive that there's a lack of importance of academic integrity because no one cares about them. And this doesn't happen as often in high-touch environments like Xavier's, but any kind of relational gap where students perceive a lack of responsiveness from their instructors or engagement with their instructors. And notice that I'm using the words perception and perceived. You know, an instructor may be very attentive, but a student may perceive that they're not. Because students are frustrated, disorganized courses is one of the things that frustrates students. Another one is not seeing importance in general education requirements and anything that could be considered by students as busy work. And we all know nobody designs anything as busy work, but that perception that, oh, this isn't important, I just have to check this box, can create some frustration because it seems unfair, and any kind of a perception of unfairness in assignments or other types of assessments. So these are kind of environmental ones. Other reasons, these are personal variables that lead students to desperation. In our institution, so my office processes, we have centralized processing of academic misconduct. And what we see is that students get desperate. It comes to the last minute, stress, pressure, implications for their future, and imposterism. So when students have goals for themselves, they are high achieving. And it's important to note imposter syndrome is sometimes the way imposterism is said. It makes it seem like there's something wrong with the student. It's actually, there's something wrong with society because there's a prototype of who a college student is. And if any aspect of a student identity doesn't match that, then they're more at risk for feeling like they're an imposter. The implications for the future can be very large. We do know there's a great deal of grade pressure for students wanting to go to medical school. And if their grade is threatened, that could enter in some desperation that could lead to unauthorized shortcuts. Struggles with perseverance, struggles with skills and with confidence. And skills and confidence struggles can come with not feeling comfortable asking questions. And procrastination and lack of effective time management, of course. Personal issues, difficult life circumstances that happen to students. We hear a lot that students have experienced, especially during the pandemic. We have had a lot of students who've either had COVID themselves, family members, deaths in the family, really difficult times, and this is really heightened during this pandemic. And competing demands for their time. So if students are working, if they have a family, if they have other competing demands that are especially fixed demands that you can't choose to not have a sick child. So these are some of these reasons that go beyond those just because they can aspects. So in promoting a culture of integrity, a suggestion is to make it a topic. So usually for students who have been in school for a while, expectations of what students come out of high school with, oh, of course they know not to do this. Something that can really, to help is to focus on what to do and good intentions, that we do integrity, and to bring it up where sometimes people don't bring it up because they expect that students already know this and already have this. They may know it, but it can help to highlight we do integrity in this class. And connecting with integrity through goals, integrity in careers that students have as their goals. How do people act with integrity, and integrity broadly, not just not plagiarizing on an assignment? And linking students to policy and resources so students know what the policy is on academic integrity. Students know what happens if there's a lack of integrity, but done so with a what to do attitude. They don't plagiarize. I was reading a paper yesterday, and the title was Eliminating the Criminal Narrative. And it was a librarian who had created a plagiarism avoidance tutorial and who had done an analysis of plagiarism messaging. And when it is boiled down to that kind of analysis, it's so highly criminal in nature that violations and judicial functions and so even when linking students to policy and resources, it's done in the framework of understanding that we take this seriously and this is really important to us, not you're going to be in trouble. In addition, approach and messaging can help. So as I was mentioning, avoiding they should know and be able to point to how they should know. And so this means making some implicit things explicit and making it very clear to students and talking about it in a positive fashion. The International Center for Academic Integrity has broken down integrity into 6 values: honesty, trust, fairness, respect, responsibility, and courage. Those are great words to integrate into messaging and communication about students. And sometimes that's the courage to make really difficult time management decisions or decisions about obligations. Creating community responsibility. So we do this in this class community. This is what we do. We proactively work. We work in ways that are filled with integrity. And discussing intrinsic goal for learning and skill development, I think the busy work situation and the general education situation really puts a demand for this in terms of why this is valuable. How are you going to use this future, skill in the future? And that students have reasons why they came to a university setting. And sometimes it's easy to forget that in the stress of the end of a semester and when final exams are approaching. But reminding students of the goals that they have for themselves, for their learning and skill development. And conveying, I got you, and steer clear, I gotcha. So it's better to stay on the side of teaching. And I understand because I have fallen into the Nancy Drewing myself as a professor, especially early on, about it's kind of an interesting investigative endeavor to notice something and dig into it and see how a student might have submitted something that was not authentically theirs. But I think taking that focus and gone, you don't want to not notice things when they happen, and you have procedures and ways to deal with those things when they do happen. But the message is got you, not I'm going to, don't plagiarize or I'll catch you kind of messaging, which it never sounds like that. It comes from a really well-intended place, but it can come across that way. And keep the messaging on. It's all about learning and skill development. All right, Jim's going to talk about authentic assessment.
Okay, so now we get to the part about putting some of these ideas into practice and sort of what you guys can do in your classes and sort of how you can set up your tests and assessments. And so I wanted to start off by introducing everybody to this idea called authentic assessment, which some of you may know about and some of you may already be doing without knowing about it. So as an academic, I always like to start off with definitions. So authentic assessment is the measurement of intellectual accomplishments that are worthwhile, significant, and meaningful. And so really what you're talking about is students applying what they know and what they've learned in a new way or context. And this next bullet point is sort of the usual way I like to try to get this across, which is asking students to show their work by acting like they're at work. So instead of setting up a test that's a multiple choice or a short answer or maybe even like a one-word answer type of scenario, you're setting up your test to where the entire context of the test or the assessment is set up to where the student is at work doing what they would normally do in your field, right? So this has the benefit of, sort of showing the students that what they're learning has context in the real world. It's not just something that I'm learning in the ivory tower of the university that I'm never going to have to think about again. This has actual real world implications, and that I will be doing these things once I get a job or once I get out into the quote unquote real world. And it also forces, I put that in quotes because they don't necessarily have to do this, but it's more individualized answers that you get from this. And because the answers are more individualized, because it's the student sort of assessing and sort of interpreting data and interpreting facts that he or she knows, The answers are more individual, which means that it's harder to go to a site somewhere and just copy and paste an answer from some other place and then paste it in and say, that's my answer. If the student does that, the chances are that you're going to be able to recognize that pretty easily, because if a student gives you an answer that doesn't seem like something that they would say, it's generally pretty obvious. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. All right, so as you're thinking about your authentic assessments and how to set them up, there are some questions that you should probably start asking yourself, which is, what is the end goal of this test or this quiz? And so, when I was a faculty member at UAB, I taught there, but I also taught well before that as well. I was actually teaching pretty much all throughout undergrad, and even I was teaching through undergrad, but also through grad school as well. And I never really spent a lot of time thinking about, why am I giving this assessment? Like, what am I actually trying to do here? Other than, oh, well, we've been in class and we've covered all of these topics, and now I need to make sure that the students can spout back the factual information that I've hopefully delivered to them. So take some time to think about what you're really trying to do with the assessment. If it's a test or if it's a quiz or whatever it is, what are you trying to do? I mean, yes, there is that aspect of, I want my students to know certain facts, but there's also probably an element in there that this sense of knowledge that you really want your students to walk away with. And so before I was the department chair for sciences, I was a program chair for the biotechnology program. So one of the examples I always like to give was come up with by one of the faculty members in our biotech program. His name is Corey Johnson, by the way. His final exam, I think, is a wonderful use of authentic assessment. And so his final exam is basically, it's a little corny, but the scenario is, you are a scientist and you're out on a hike somewhere. And on this hike, you see this plant that you've never seen before. And you're, kind of a hobby botanist. So you have a pretty good idea about what plants are and what new plants and what, plants that everybody knows about look like. But this plant doesn't quite look exactly like anything that you know about. And because you're a scientist and you have access to a lab, you take a sample of this plant and you bring it back to the lab and you start running a bunch of tests on it, some of which are genetic, some of which are biochemical. But that's the exam. The exam is that scenario. And then you come back into the lab and you run this test, right? You isolate the DNA. And so the student has to walk through, what is the process for isolating DNA from a plant? And then you take this DNA and then you submit it to the genomics core facility and it gets sequenced. And then the sequence comes back and then you have to analyze the sequence. So in order to be able to answer all of those types of questions, you need to know the facts that you delivered to the students in the class. But then the student needs to take all of those things and sort of rework all of those in their head and say, okay, if I have this, then I need to write all this stuff out. It's much more complex than just saying, if this, then that, tell me what happens, or here is a biochemical pathway with one thing missing from the biochemical pathway, what's missing from that pathway. So really focusing on concepts rather than facts, focusing on higher level thinking. But then the other thing to think of is, which one of these things do I really want to focus on in the test, right? Because in this bioinformatics course that Corey teaches, he covers a lot of stuff, right? But not all of that is going to get to be on the final. And that's okay too. You don't necessarily have to test over everything that happened during the semester, but focus on the key things, the larger concepts, which everything will kind of sort of get covered. All right, so move on.
Yeah, so Jim got at this question, as you think about alternatives to exams, what could students do only if they understand the content, like the example that he shared? Here's a laundry list of ideas for how students can take content and apply it. Research proposals, portion of a research grant application, teaching. There's a number of teaching elements of creating a presentation, a visual, an advocacy project, a lesson plan, study materials, busting myths in every type of science. There are myths out there, and they do need to be busted. So this is just one list to start thinking about. Students can only do this if they understand the content. Robin's going to share examples from our science classes.
So in our classes, we use a whole host of types, or whole host of learning experiences for the students. We have virtual labs, we have projects that the students have to do. So I just want to walk you through some of the, the examples that we use in our classes. We have assignments that are geared primarily to the lower level courses like this Gen Bio lab course. And then we have some upper levels that I'm going to show you as well. So in our lab classes, we use, and this is general biology, we use a lab software company called Tabletop Sciences. And they provide rigorous labs that are not only hands-on, the students aren't physically doing them, but they're doing manipulations that are completely virtual. But the importance of these labs is that not only are they manipulating things using the computer, but they're really minds on. So that's important because the students have to work through and really think about what they're doing. So even though they're not physically doing it in a classroom, they really have to think about the next steps. And so it allows them to learn by interacting with these programs and doing these activities. What's beautiful about the Tabletop Sciences labs is that it allows the students to have individualized data sets. The company works with us to manipulate the data sets. So students, it'll randomize the data that student sees. And then they have built-in authentication systems so that we know that we can identify a student based on the code that they're given when they sign up for the particular labs. Each lab provides background information. It allows you to see exactly what you're going to do before you do the lab. And then there's even a faculty-only area so that the faculty can see exactly what they should assess when they grade the labs. We go to the next slide. So this is just an example of the background information that a student and a faculty member will see when they log onto the Tabletop Sciences labs. So there are a series of 8 labs that we use for biology. Each one comes with background information. The background information really goes through and gives a good overview of what exactly this lab is about. It has diagrams. If you go to the next slide, there are calculations that the students will have to work through. And then it also goes through a step-by-step procedure as to what each student will have to do when they complete this lab. You go to the next slide. Then there are the actual lab activities under the activity tab that the student sees. And again, there are 8 labs. The students do the labs. They can start again if they mess up. They can, manipulate the different parameters in the lab so they get different results. And then if you look at where that arrow is, and there's a unique activity code that each student will see. And as they go through the lab, they have to take screenshots of each of the screens as they manipulate the data, so that the instructor can authenticate. And if you the next slide, you get that unique activity code, and it's unique to every single student. And so the student can then, the faculty member can then track exactly what the student is doing and authenticate the student in that way. We go to the next one. In another introductory or lower level class, we use information booklets. So students have to create information booklets, again, to show their knowledge. And in this particular course, what's good is that the students can choose their own topic, and often they choose something that is of interest to them, a disease that runs in their family or something that they have. And so it really gets them to be interested in the topic that they're researching. And so they have to create this informational booklet that will teach a community about a particular condition. And so the students really get interested in it, because then they have to present place the booklets in the classroom, and so other students critique their booklets. And so it really gives them an opportunity to learn about a particular condition that they've been learning about things in class. This is a human biology class. And so they become the expert, if you will, for that particular class, because they have to be able to go in and defend and explain exactly what they learned about these particular conditions that they've done. You go to the next slide. In our upper level courses, we try to focus on authentic assessments that are sometimes group-based. So in this particular course, and it's bacteria, viruses, and health, there's a group project where the faculty members think about or give them current events to work on. And so last year, the hottest current event going was COVID-19. And so in this particular current events group project, the students had to prepare a PowerPoint presentation that went over the vaccines and the vaccine development. And so there were 3 groups. And so one group did Moderna vaccine, the other group did the Pfizer vaccine, and the third group did the AstraZeneca vaccine. And so they had to work together to think about and talk about how vaccines provide protection, you know, the different stages of vaccine development and the progress to that point in the testing. And just before they presented, you know, at least 2 of them in the United States were approved. And so they had to go through that approval process. And so it was a whole series of step-by-step learning, a stage project where students actually walk through how they, you know, how a vaccine goes from, you know, idea to development. And so they were able to demonstrate their learning all along the way. So again, it wasn't a test, but, you know, it was things that they were learning in the class. And so it all culminated into this larger project at the end where they had to present. The next slide. And in another upper level class, our bioethics class, students do debates. There are debates where students have to argue pro or con on a topic that is of interest to, you know, society. And so every semester the topics change or the papers change. So their students are given a paper and they have to read the paper and argue either pro or con. And it's really interesting to watch. And if you go to hit the next slide, you can see a list of the topics. But every semester, you know, you'll have students who have to argue a topic or a point that they don't agree with, but they have to be able to defend the topic that they were assigned. And then in the end, at the end of the debate, they can put their real feelings, their true feelings, and their true argument about it. But it just forces them to really work through having to argue something that they may or may not agree with, and some things that they don't even know about. So the discussion, and so they conduct these debates in the online discussion area. And so they are charged with monitoring what people say, what questions are asked, what question the instructor may ask. They have to be able to defend their topic and be really informed about their topic, because again, they take on the role of an expert in these particular debates. So what we try to do, especially in the sciences and biological sciences, is we try to make sure that in every class there are at least 2 authentic projects. So not just exams, but 2 authentic projects that the students really have to work through so that they can integrate all the concepts that they're learning. And that's it.
Right. Thank you. For other disciplines outside of STEM, and maybe in STEM depending on context. So one design that can help motivate authentic work is phased group projects, where the next phase depends on the previous phase. And so the students have accountability to other students. And like some of the examples Robin talked about have some of that element on it. Vlogging, you know, it's more similar to a video presentation, but vlogs is a current way that people are getting their ideas out there. Parodies, like you have got to understand something to parody. I actually have done a number of statistics parody songs and some other things from areas that I have studied. And then I met a chemistry professor at using case studies to teach science workshop at Buffalo. And he started assigning his students parodies in his chemistry class. But any topic can be used. Newspaper opinion pieces, on-the-spot challenges. If you have a synchronous class, I call this a reality show kind of model of having students do something that is on the spot. It's a little bit more challenging, but it's taken into account If there's a brief challenge that can form a really low stakes kind of assessment, that's a unexpected but engaging kind of activity, or or preparation for an assessment. Making a web page, writing a memo. So like Jim was talking about, all these kinds of workplace related kinds of ways that students can show content knowledge. But of course, if you cannot avoid an exam, we've got some question. Yep.
Yes, we do. If you don't mind me interrupting you real quick. One thing is, it came up from the chat. Asim asked about the size of class, and he's getting that answered. But what about a rough estimate for the time commitment on some of these authentic assessments? Some of these, I lost the question here. Some of these, the evaluating student performance on some of these more creative, authentic assessments. And then my guess is also that some of my colleagues are also wanting to ask, when you do these authentic assessment, like Jim, the botany project you mentioned, how do you assure that there's no academic dishonesty going on in what's being turned in? So those are two questions before we move on, if you don't mind.
All right. So, Jim, would you address the time? Jim or Robin, either of you, the time issue?
Robin might be a little bit better placed for the time issue. I'll say, as far as the scalability, I'm going to call it a scalability issue. If we're talking about 60, 70, 80, 100 students in a class, your LMS, which if I understand you guys are using Brightspace for that, might be able to help with that, depending on how things are structured. It's possible that you can set up an assessment that's at least part of it can be graded by the LMS, and then the other part will have to be hand graded. And that, if you're talking about an assessment and you're talking about somebody else being able to auto grade half of it or 3/4 of it, that cuts down your time significantly, that you can then spend more focused time on grading maybe the most authentic assessed part of that exam, as opposed to all of the other stuff that's a little bit less.
Yeah, I agree. I think the learning management system would help a lot there. So on the front end, setting up the assignment is, in my opinion, takes the longest amount of time. And usually we've worked in groups to kind of create the assignment. And then we develop pretty detailed rubrics so that it minimizes the amount of time that it does take to grade, because you're looking for specific things. And those specific things are given to the students from the very beginning, so that they know what is required for each assignment. So the important thing to minimize how long it takes, and I know you guys seem to have, hundreds of students in your class. I think setting up the rubric would be the best thing, and then setting up students in groups, especially in the LMS, would help a lot.
Yep. Okay, and then there was the question about how do you make sure that students are not going to take some shortcuts on these new types of assignments. So one piece of it, first of all, they are usually encountered as more engaging for students, and students get more motivated to do these. The other piece is to build in specific elements that it would be really hard for a student, you shouldn't be able to go find your assignment out there on the internet very easily, the exact assignment, at minimum changing out topics, but these should be designed, like I had it was a research proposal outline that was done in such a specific format that it wasn't something a student could go find. And so when they're more specific and they're more real life based and they're more engaging, then a lot of that takes care of it itself. You can't prevent a student from going and getting somebody else to do their assignment. That's a different level. That's it's a higher level. I can't say the students wouldn't do it, but it would cost them a lot more to hire somebody to do one of these things than it would for a standard research essay, I would say, for that, or to take an exam. So I think it's the integrity mostly comes through the motivation and the engagement and the uniqueness of the assignment. And I will say it is front-loaded time, as Jim and Robin are talking about. It's more time to design it, but the payoff, these are more fun to read. I mean, I'm just going to say from a grading standpoint, it's more interesting, especially when students get more engaged in these. And the rubrics, just to reiterate what Robin was talking about with the rubrics, is build a rubric and use that rubric to guide the grading. And so that I think is where the time savings can come at the end. And so it's more front loaded.
Yeah, I will say that I mentioned earlier about the bumpy ride I had going from face-to-face learning to online learning. One of the things I learned upon reflection after maybe a couple of semesters of trying to replicate face-to-face in an online environment was that the pre-planning and the planning before a semester starts is really where things get made or broken. That especially since most of our classes are asynchronous, if you're trying to replicate sort of a natural, spontaneous conversation that you'd have in a face-to-face environment in an asynchronous manner, it's not going to go well. That you really need to spend some time up front thinking about what are we going to discuss, how are we going to discuss it. To borrow a phrase that my wife uses a lot of the time, fun needs to be planned. If you don't plan things out, you can't have as much fun as you would if it's planned. And I know that sounds probably nerdy, but I think I'm talking to a lot of STEM people, so I think that's okay.
I'm going to take that statement. I like that. That's great. All right. So do we have other questions at this point?
Nope, we're good. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and we're coming towards the end of our content, and then have open time for Q&A. So I am at the.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jen. There is one more question. Okay. I didn't see it. This is also from Awesome. Unmute if I don't get it right. But he said here's a specific scenario that they do coordinated courses. Remember we talked about how some of these science courses are coordinated. So a group of students, 500 plus, are taking the same courses on the same schedule, and that's oftentimes how we see they can put the questions, upload them into Chegg and other kind of things.
Yep.
And he said it's more like a comment than a question, but just to kind of inform as you move forward. Thanks, Awesome.
Yeah, and actually I think my next slide is going to address some of these things. So what we've talked about is all of those kind of motivational and engagement, and how to make assignments more unique and how to have more personal, different information in assignments rather than just stating factual information. But now I am going to talk about more of the plagiarism proofing and kind of the cheat proofing exams. So if you cannot avoid an exam, of course, aligning questions with the course's learning objectives. Going back to that, and when Jim was talking about selecting content, I think those learning objectives can be your touch point to make a hierarchy of what content is more important than other content, to pare it down, given our environments, to the most essential. The exam should not be the first time that students have been assessed that way. So either through practice, those on-the-spot moments to prepare for an assessment can be a good time to help students prepare. Creating questions, and I think that elicit higher order cognitive skills, so the upper levels on the revised Bloom's taxonomy, so engaging application especially. Application questions are a great way to not have students, if it's just factual information, students will write the same thing. Those 500 students who are all taking the same class, they know the answer. But if there's a way they have to explain it, then that gets to other skills. Consider contextualizing cases with scenarios, especially provide your own example questions. When students have to provide their own example, they can't just use something that they have heard about. Using a variety of question types, of course, that's just for any exam. Randomizing, so here's where you can use your LMS to randomize from sets of questions, and especially at the beginning of the exam. And something to note is this really gets at, you need to design your exams for the environment your students are in. If they are taking the exam online, then they have the internet, they have their notes, they have their books, they have ability to communicate with other people in ways that may not be detected on a camera proctor. And so this really gets at, if they're trying to communicate with another student, is to select from a set of questions, so the exams don't look the same if like two students were communicating and trying to match up questions. That at the beginning and then periodically throughout the exam, the questions should not match, so they give up. They should give up trying to collaborate with each other. Modify wording of test bank questions. So I can tell you if you're using any test bank questions, they are out there on the internet. I was just telling the group earlier today in our consultation that when I was applying for this job, I was preparing an exam and I was doing a few multiple choice questions, and I looked for my test bank questions and voila, there they were on Quizlet. So they were right there. So I just reworded them, and then it makes them not searchable. And setting limited time. So setting time so students don't have time to look everything up. That's a strategy in online learning that is really one of kind of the standards for exams. I used to use online exams even in my face-to-face class because I didn't want to give up class time and I wanted students to have a little bit of extra time to do exams. And the feedback came from really the top performing students in the class. They're like, wow, it was open book and open notes and internet, but I really had to think. You know, it didn't mean that it was easy. And that was like the best compliment I could get because that's exactly how I was intending the exam. It had application questions on it. It had a mixture of some factual questions to form the factual basis, some shorter answer questions, you know, variety of question types. But it was done within a time frame where they could not look everything up for the more factual type of information. That it was pretty limited, but and then they had time to work on the application type questions. And also to include more written questions, you can use rubrics if you haven't already for essay questions. That rubrics are not just for papers and written assignments, but you can use those to save on grading time. And Robin's going to talk about low stakes quizzing in our biology program.
So initially I thought about, okay, just showing you guys questions, but you've all seen, you have questions. You probably have great questions, better questions than I have. So the key thing that I wanted to mention is using the LMS is going to be the best thing you can do. Making sure that you use the LMS to set time limits. And make clear instructions. There are ways within the LMS that you can set it so that students can't go backwards, or that they can't, or that they only see a certain number of questions per page, or that you in D2L that you can lock it down so that they can't open any other browsers. And then, you know, in other institutions, I know they use software like Respondus, where the students it watches them and it, you know, tracks what they do. In that particular learning management system. So, you know, even though we use a lot of authentic assessments, but we do, especially in our low level courses, use exams and quizzes. Oftentimes they're low stakes though, so they don't carry as much weight as the authentic assessments. But we do use them because that is still a good way to assess what the students know. So again, the best way or the best suggestion that I have here is to make sure that you're utilizing the learning management system to set it up so that it can minimize students having the ability to cheat.
Mm-hmm. Another option, actually, Jim and Robin, I didn't tell you I was going to talk about this, but I really thought of that there are some programs that come with textbooks. I used a gamified adaptive testing with an introductory psychology textbook, and the students could start the quiz and earn 100, but it would take them a very long time to do it if they hadn't read. And so this is more of the knowledge foundation types of quizzing. There's some really creative tools out there that are offered by publishers if you aren't already using some of those as well.
Yeah, I've become a really big fan of adaptive learning, and this is, you know, something that's going to require some investment of money from the university. So that's a whole separate other thing. But if it's a possibility, it's definitely a path worth going down. We've been piloting a couple of things in our math and stats classes, and they've worked incredibly well. We used to have prerequisites for our stat class. We now don't have those anymore. We use the adaptive learning as a co-requisite, and we're still able to show that students succeed at a higher rate and will then re-enroll at higher rates the following semester or the following term. It's really pretty amazing.
All right, so we are at the end of what we have, and I see we only officially have 4 minutes for questions. I'm glad we've gotten some throughout, but what else, what other questions do we have?
At this point, if somebody wants to, maybe Jen, if you'll stop sharing your screen so we can see each other, if you don't mind, if you could do that.
I don't mind at all.
And so if anybody wants to unmute and ask, I know you guys asked me a lot of questions. So what specific, and let's try to be focused with the time. Or you can put in the chat and I'll ask it. What questions might you have?
And also you can ask questions after the fact and Elizabeth can send them to us and we can do some FAQs as well. If you think of something later, because we always think of great questions later.
There are a couple of here, yeah. I don't want to take your time, so ask questions if you've got it. But I'm looking back at the comments people started putting at the beginning, and most of them were about test taking. So it was about actual test taking, things like searching for answers while taking the test, talking to each other, using appliances, electronics that are not approved, those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the best exam design for an online setting is to take all those things into account. And it's a different way to think about testing. But once you start thinking in that direction, it's similar. I mean, it's another type of authentic assessment to think about using exam questions in a different way than the typical face-to-face and proctored environment.
Anybody chime in here?
One thing that I do want to, because I saw in the chat people were asking about questions being uploaded to the different sites. UMGC has invested in, we have a bot that searches a lot of those sites and issues takedown notices. And that same type of technology is embedded in the tabletop sciences labs. They have a bot that searches every day for their content on the internet, and they immediately issue takedown notices. And what's good about tabletop sciences and their bots is that they can identify the students. So when I get a report from TTS telling me this student in this class submitted to CHEG, I send a message to the class. We realize that somebody in this class submitted their work to CHEG. TTS work is copyrighted. We're not going to press charges this time, but I can't guarantee that they're not going to do it again. And I get so many students right. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. And we already know who it is because Tabletop Sciences has already reached out to that student. But it's another level, another layer of protection that we put in place.
Mm-hmm.
We've got time for one last question. Anybody? I'm happy. Hey, Anita, nice to see you. I am happy to. Did you have a question, Anita? You turned on your camera. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I just had a quick question. I wanted to know if the ability to lock down browser use is a standard feature in Blackboard, or is this something that's customized for different universities? I haven't heard of it at the university that I'm at, Syracuse, but I just was wondering if anyone knew if it was standard for Blackboard. That's the LMS that we use.
I think that depends on what features your university has turned on and what LMS you're using. But it is something that some LMSs allow. But it depends on where you are. And as we have found out at UMGC, it also depends on which features your university has turned on.
Mm-hmm. And something to keep in mind on a little bit of a cynical front is that students may be accessing the internet on their phone if they're on
another device. Yeah.
So it's I would invest. Always. I think our message is really invest time in design, and other things become a little bit easier later. And also, the time to deal with an academic misconduct report, that's time consuming. And I also remember, it's just emotionally consuming. I used to joke that instead of the student getting a lower grade, I wanted my laundry done because it took so much time out of my day and so much emotional time too. When your students and somebody does something. And so consider the balance. And I'm not saying, be out to catch folks and do those reports, but it's happening. And so the time is better invested in design.
And I'm just going to back that up, because I really think that with these surveillance techniques, right, because that's what they are, lockdown, monitor, these kind of surveillance techniques, it creates, there's some real cons to it in terms of creating a real anti-student kind of climate while they're taking these assessments that I believe in some cases they might be necessary, but I also believe that we can work on the upfront to make them less necessary, because there's a lot of chatting about that right now in the Chronicle of Higher Ed about how this really disadvantages some students, especially with technology differences or test anxiety differences or these kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
It is 5:31. I'm sure that our speakers are happy to stick around for a few minutes to answer questions if there's follow-up questions. I am so grateful to them, and there's some good discussion going in the chat. So I suggest you look at that. Jim, thank you for responding to that. You saw that we've got a rubrics workshop coming up. So hey, let's come learn about rubrics. And if you do continue to have questions about these, please let me know, and I will pass them on, and we'll keep improving and doing the best we can. Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to add real quick, because I saw a lot of comments about larger classes. There are a lot of workshops on problem-based learning and creating projects, especially for larger groups. University of Delaware just had one at the beginning of the month, but there are others, and I can try to look some up because I like to go to those project-based learning workshops. And a lot of times they're quite inexpensive. The one in the University of Delaware was just $25 for a 3-day workshop. So, if I find any, I can pass it on to you guys and let you know about them, because it can be time consuming at the beginning, but once you get the project in place, it's easier to manipulate, and grading, once you get a rubric in place as well, it's not as time consuming to do as you might think.
Yep. Yeah, I got to spend an entire week at McMaster University doing project-based learning workshop and seeing how they use project-based learning throughout their medical school. And it's a fascinating process to see. Also, case studies, if you're not familiar with the Buffalo case studies collection, some of those could be adapted into some assessments.
Yeah, I use those as well for my classes.
Yeah, they're excellent.
Great.
Yep, and somebody's already done those, and I think there are enough of them, that it, and especially if you took one of the case studies and then assessmentized it, I guess you would say, then that creates a unique assessment that is not easily found.
Thank you, folks. Please join me in giving them a big hand. Where's reactions? A big hand. Woohoo!
It's really nice to be with you all, even if remotely, even without beignets.
Exactly.
Oh, beignets and cafe au lait.
And king cake right now. King cake.
Oh yeah, there's some flavored chicken up, by the way. Okay. Yep. Oh, king cake. It is the time. It's getting. It is.
Tis the season. Thanks everybody. To my colleagues, it's so good seeing you as always. Be well. Awesome. You only add to the conversation. You're never tolerated. Always appreciated.